Oh, hi everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. Um, if not, there isn't lunch here, but we could. It's a good place to eat lunch anyway. So I know these guys quite well, and it's a pleasure to be moderating this stage. And of course, I think this is one of the hot topics today, mainly from a trader's perspective, and I'm also very interested to find out what are the answers to some of the questions that I'm about to ask. But maybe before we even begin, I'll do a self intro real quick, and then everyone could actually provide maybe a 10-second intro of themselves. 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds intro of yourself as well. Okay, so my name is Jeremy. I'm involved in the space with Consentium, which is a chat application for blockchain. So prior to this, I'm also a managing partner of Novum Global, which is a leading accelerator fund as well as consultancy for blockchain projects. I'm also a managing partner of CRC Capital, which is a crypto fund set up by several notable VCs in Singapore. Okay, so next, Guotie, please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Guo Jie. You can call me DJ. I'm the head of BBox Southeast Asia. So BBox is one of the largest cryptocurrency exchange globally. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Journey Lee, and I'm the PR and Communication Manager at DigiFinex. And we are also a cryptocurrency exchange. We consistently ranked top 5 on CoinMarketCap. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm one of the partners of QCP. We're a crypto trading firm based here in Singapore. We have an OTC desk and we trade a lot of futures, options, and swaps as well. We're very happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Marcus Lim. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ZipMax. ZipMax is a digital asset exchange platform headquartered here in Singapore with an Asia Pacific focus. So we have offices in Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, and Australia as well. And we're pretty much focused on being the most trusted platform.
All right, thanks everyone for the intro. So let's jump straight into it, right? I think everybody wants to know, right? This is literally the $1,000,000 question. Are IEOs gonna completely replace ICOs, right? What do you think, Guotie?
Right, I think they will call it this, in my opinion. Before we talk about details, I just want to make an announcement. Over here at BBox, we are going to launch our very first IEO next week. Please stay tuned. Right, so back to the question. I think IEO right now is becoming the buzzword. It's getting popular for certain type of projects, but not for all projects. So I do believe there are other blockchain projects out there which is more suitable in the form of ICO. But both ICO and IEO, to me, I think they are just a way of fundraising. But then for IEO, it combines both fundraising as well as exchange listing at the same time. It creates a better PR and marketing campaign for a project which is lacking in that aspect. And to the investor, the IEO form, because exchange like us, we do a lot of the due diligence. We are more experienced in assessing a project's quality. So for those projects we selected the IEO platform, that means we already done our duty. Is a kind of a protection to our users as compared to a typical ICO. Yeah, that's my take on that.
Johnny, you want to talk about this as well?
I think an IEO is probably a more organized and systemized way compared to ICO. But of course, the mechanisms behind are pretty similar. And a lot of people who are into IEO these days, they probably have their experiences previously, investing in ICOs. So, of course, the main difference between IEO and ICO is that the exchange is responsible for selecting the projects to make sure it has a sound, business model, the teams are legit. And at the same time, all the IEO projects will be immediately listed on the exchange that hosts their token offering, which actually solves one of the biggest problems, because previously a lot of projects that actually launched the token, they couldn't have liquidity because they do not get listed on exchanges. Sorry, you're saying is IEO gonna be?
Yeah, is it gonna replace like ICOs completely?
It's Probably, I think a better way for both investors and the projects, because you can see we are kind of like forming this ecosystem that everyone is maturing. You know, we're getting better in terms of security, in terms of understanding where blockchain projects' value really are. So I think it's definitely a healthier, development in the space. But I don't believe there will be as many ICOs as IEOs because good projects, after all, are rare. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe before Joshua, maybe Marcus first, because Joshua will definitely have a very different take on this, I think.
Yeah, sure. So I think just to sum up what both speakers have already said, I think that the fundamental difference between ICO and IEO is the value proposition that IEO provides is firstly, the curation to all these projects, which inherently there are a lot of issues during the ICO process with scams, right? So the exchange now has the responsibility of curating these projects, which is great. So they do all the due diligence, right? And so the investor can rest assured. Secondly, is the liquidity. So she's mentioned that a lot of the projects that raised capital previously weren't able to list their tokens on exchange. So from an investor's point of view, purely from an investor's point of view, liquidity is important because they need to get their money back. Thirdly, I think speed to market. So speed to market is extremely important. So being able to raise efficiently obviously saves a lot of time for the project because the whole fundraising process can take up to a year, and we've all seen that. And depending on the time of the market, so I think these are the three key core value propositions for IEOs. Now, to answer your question on whether it actually replaces ICO, I certainly don't think it will. I think the process of ICO, I mean, if you kind of look at it from a capital raising point of view, there is always a place for institutional investors to come in, and institutional investors typically are part of the private funding round. And institutional investors are important because they bring strategic network to the actual projects themselves. Whereas, I mean, with the IEOs that we've actually seen, it's very much fundamentally skewed towards the consumer market, right? So being able to raise from a ton of people very quickly. Whereas I think for projects, how they are able to kind of scale and also provide better credibility is to get institutional investors on board.
Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with most of the above in the sense that it's not going to replace ICOs because fundamentally it's centralized, right? You're not going to stop people from using a decentralized form of fundraising. You can't literally take that out of their hands. Whether it improves the quality of the projects and the waves that are coming out there, I don't really care to comment. I'd much rather tell you what I see on the ground. We see a lot of the action taking place on and off exchange, and I certainly can't complain. It's been a nice little bump in the market. It's been a lot of interest coming back in from the retail side. In the grand scheme of things, has it made a huge impact on the crypto market as a whole? No, right? The pretty well evidenced from trading volumes and the general size of the market, which kind of spiked up to 180 yards at one point, but it's back down to 170 now. So is it here to stay? I think people will definitely pursue it as an option, but we personally, as a firm, we haven't invested in any.
Cool. I have so many questions on that actually, but well, maybe for me, I just want to take a less popular opinion on this stage, and I think that IEOs seem to be a very natural progression of where the ICO goes because effectively you're talking about more protection for the users, right, and more seamless liquidation for them because if you buy into an ICO, there's no guarantee you can get on an exchange, right? I mean, we are just all praying that the founders actually live up to their words and do it. But for an IEO, more or less, it's going to happen. So when I take that perspective purely from a trader's standpoint, it seems more appropriate if not given enough time to research and things like that to actually buy into an IEO, and that seems like a better bet, so to speak, right? Purely from a profit-driven kind of mentality. But nonetheless, I think the verdict's still out, and we'll see what actually develops in time. So this is a question, I guess, more for the exchanges, but should all exchanges engage in IEOs? Is DigiFinex doing an IEO? I mean, we know BBox is. Is DigiFinex doing one? Just
Technically speaking, of course, we can do it. And I think it still comes down to the projects and where, blockchain as a technology is developing and where the value, is to provide to our investors, especially since you mentioned for retail investors, they need the protection the most because they are, sometimes, actually most of the time, less informed. Yeah, so as an exchange, we are very, very responsible for that.
So basically, you're saying you will go into an IEO. Really?
Exploring.
Okay. How about Zimex? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think exchange should definitely explore doing an IEO. I think the IEO process is very similar to to an IPO process. I mean, what we've seen with IPO process is you have your banks and brokers and the exchange being involved, and this really kind of compresses everything into one. Um, the question really is about whether the exchange can do an IEO, and I think there are fundamental regulatory problems that need to be solved, and at the moment it's still a very grey area. And so IEOs are being run out of different jurisdictions that are quite relaxed. But ultimately, I think what we've seen is regulation coming into play. So how that's gonna how exchange are going to be positioned to do an IEO. I think that there'll be very interesting development moving forward.
Cool. Joshua, you have any take on this? If not, I do have a question directed to you.
Well, I'd say in the last wave of IEOs, like 40 of them have taken place so far. I think 12, 13 exchanges have participated, probably more that I'm not counting. We've definitely seen an uptick in SAF trading as a result of this. All day, every day, inbound requests for people trying to offload SAFs on escrow. That's the main outcome, to be honest. I've seen a lot more activity volume-wise from that than I've seen on IEOs.
Cool. And a question for you, Joshua, is are IEOs actually relevant to institutional investors?
I mean, that's actually pretty binary, right? Like, if you look at an institution that wants to invest in the space, and obviously you can bracket institutions into, your Bridgewaters, your Chicago trading houses, and then your smaller prop shops and family offices. If we consider like family offices an institution, then yeah, I've seen some of them participate, at least the more adventurous ones. But as you move up the ladder, and then there's more and more checklists of requirements to satisfy for them to participate, it's very unlikely that they could even have the mandate or the ability to put their funds into an IEO. They're not going to sign up on an exchange, create an account, contribute some decentralized
Yeah.
currency, and buy it and hold
Yeah.
it. Right? They just
Yeah.
won't.
Okay. So this is an open question. Anyone who feels like you may have the best answer, or you really want to go for this question, please answer. So what projects should the public you look out for a successful IEO? What projects? What type of projects would define a successful one that you foresee?
I'm just going to jump in real quick. I think looking at the nature of IEOs, consumer projects obviously make the most sense because they have the widest appeal. However, in terms of the project themselves, I don't want to provide any financial advice here and list out any of the projects, but I think normally when you look at investing in anything, you kind of look at the fundamental principles of the company itself. So things like the team, things like the value proposition, the customer problem, the solution they're going to be providing, and the business model. So these are the 5 key things that you should always look at. But I think in terms of the nature of IEOs, definitely consumer projects.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in?
I just want to highlight one more point beside the usual aspects that we just spoke about when you conduct due diligence. The other key thing that when an exchange looking for projects for IEO, we are also concerned about the financial status of a project. If you are a project without any funding, it's almost impossible for you to conduct an IEO. It's preferred that the project already done some round of private fundraising so that we can kickstart an IEO.
Yeah. So on that note, actually, I think that's really useful. So in the crypto space, right, we are writing our own playbooks most of the time. There is no model to follow after. So I think with respect to an IEO, how should an IEO really be defined today? I mean, apart from the simple fact that yes, you are going to get listed on an exchange, and yes, you are buying on an exchange. But how should we define an IEO? What do you think? Not an easy question, I think.
I mean, I'm no expert on IEOs, but as far as I can tell, it very much bears a lot of the similarities to an ICO, except in a centralized fashion, they need to be approved. A certain amount of due diligence goes into them from the exchange side. And there's a few extra rules that go into place. I believe some exchanges force them to hold the funding for up to a year before it gets released. So it's like an ICO with extra steps.
So basically, just offer way more protection, for the users.
Yeah, just a few more details. I think for people who have done ICOs before, I think a lot of ICO projects, when they offer the tokens, they actually sort of encourage you to get in early, right? They actually launch in different phases, and usually phase one people get discounts, so you actually buy at a lower price. And then also and sometimes they don't even give an individual cap, right? But for IEOs, I think they do have that extra layer of protection. So usually it's less than, I think so far, the hard cap is less than 10 million. And then they will have an individual cap as well. So all these registered users on the exchange, they will not overbuy, and they will all make sure everyone is buying the token at the same price without the different phases and discounts.
Okay. So I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but what projects should not do an IO? What type of projects do you think?
I think it's the same thing, right? For those if you're not in the terminology of an ICO, if you're not fundamentally strong, if you can't do an ICO, naturally you can't do an IEO as well. It's like,
So you're saying that in fact the standards held for an IU for a project on an IEO is actually even higher than
Yes.
an ICO.
yes.
Mhm.
And I think for going forward, right, whether it's ICO or IEO, I think the maybe those projects backed by or initiated by established company with steady cash flow, with use case, right, with traffic volume, that will help, right. For for startups without any fundings or real use case or users, I think it's going to be tough whether you want to do an ICO or IEO. Right?
Okay, so we deviate a bit from the IEO topic. Oh, you have okay.
Just
Go
going to
ahead.
comment really quickly on this. So prior to what I was saying before, is that IEO kind of really appeals to the consumer market. I think the opposite then is in terms of companies that are more geared towards an enterprise solution. And typically these companies would want to get strategic investors on board, so institutional investors, because they will provide the network and also the right corporate governance to come in, as opposed to kind of really pushing it out to the consumer market, where the consumer really can't really kind of relate to that project itself from a pure retail standpoint. So I think really enterprise projects probably aren't as suited to IEOs.
Okay, yeah, that's I think interesting to consider. So I'm going to use this word loosely because IEOs are technically not new; they've been around for a while now. But besides, this game-changing IEO that everybody's talking about today, anything else is exciting happening in the space of token sales? Any other buzzwords? Any other thing that people are buying into? Yeah.
I think STO is another buzzword, but of course, for crypto exchanges, we don't do STO at the moment.
Are there plans though?
There are always plans.
Yeah, I think SEO is definitely the next paradigm shift here. But I think before we get there is the steps in between. And so something that's really interesting that we're currently working on is asset-backed tokens. So there's a company in Australia that just released information on the ASX. It's called X Gold. So they're a gold-backed token. So they work together with Jaggards. So I think asset-backed tokens is kind of that interim step before we get to pure STOs. And also, what's also really interesting, which I think is coming into the market, is providing synthetic products for equities. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Thailand, retail consumers can't get access to US equities because it's a nightmare for them and it's extremely expensive. So there's a product out there that we're going to be offering that allows people to buy Apple stocks with Bitcoin.
Cool. So maybe this is just a light question, and just because I could never get into any IEOs, Anyone bought into an IEO lately? Right? Any success?
No.
Guojie, you sure? I'm pretty sure you have something. Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the B-Box IEO.
Well, yeah. I mean, the truth is, I mean, with IEO being so competitive now for users to get into, and the fact that there are not that many, like compared to the the previous world, which is the ICOs, it is really hard for investors to buy in. And I think that a lot of this is reminiscent of what we saw in the 2017 ICO bull run, in my opinion. And I think a large part of this is actually leading a wave of revitalization in token sales, and which is why I think this topic is all the more like relevant today. I mean, on the note of STOs, I think it is very separate, right? It's not necessarily a progression of ICOs or IEOs, but the fact that it's more of a reverse element of existing companies with a track record with proven equity structure and corporate structure who are looking to get into STOs. But again, very good and interesting topic as well. I think I'm quite sure there's another stage for that, so I won't get into that. So thanks everybody, and I think at this point maybe just go one round, and if anyone has any other last points to add, please feel free to shoot. Anything from you, Guojie? You're gonna talk about the IEOs on B-Box, right?
No, not so much. Maybe just now you mentioned that we kind of created the FOMO again as compared to late 2017 because of IEO. So there are a lot of things to consider when I retail investor want to participate in IEO. So the way we design the mechanism also differs from each other. Sometimes you do first come first serve, right? But then you worry about those robots who are much faster than you. So we slowly shift it to a lucky draw mechanism, right? IEO is I believe IEO is also evolving. It might be in a totally different form 3 months from now. Yeah. So I also want to add a little bit on the institutional involvement in IEO. I think definitely there's not much direct participation of IEO from institutional investors. By institutional investors, I mentioned those are large institution, so-called institutional traders in the crypto space, not the traditional guys like Blackstone, BlackRock, right? So even in the space of crypto space, those institutional investors are not very actively participating in IEO. Firstly, because the amount is low, the individual cap. Secondly, it's not guaranteed. So most of them are still participating in the private rounds of those IEO projects. But one downside is that they will be locked up for a longer term, and the price of private investors they used to get as compared to the IEO price now is narrowing, right? So they don't really get a huge discount nowadays. So that's something I have been observing for private investors in the space.
I think I would just speak a little bit more generally in terms of, the idealism of cryptocurrency. I mean, in the first place, I think cryptocurrency was a payment, right? Start with Bitcoin that is supposed to decentralize the power, decentralize money. And I think we are still early in this innovation, and there will always be new projects, and there will always be projects and people who need to raise funds. So whether it's ICO, IEO, or other kind of token offering, I think the trend is more and more people are getting involved. More and more people are getting to understand this better. I think we are optimistic in the future. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, as I've said already on stage, I'm not particularly strong opinion either way. I just assumedly there are some retail investors in the crowd, and there is an obvious moral hazard here that this is just a marriage of convenience between exchanges outside of the pool, outside of Binance. Pretty much everyone else is struggling either to make profit or liquidity. So the problem with that is you then have profits coming from listing fees and whatnot. And we're going back to the old paradigm. So the assumption that an IEO dictated by a centralized exchange that is obviously a better filter than the individual, I think, is moot. I don't think you can rely on that. So there's the obvious issue of exchanges capitalizing on that and shitty projects just paying their way into raising money because they can't do it through an ICO. So just be wary, do your research, and if you can, try to avoid being too taken in by the hype.
So I think from our point of view, our vision is to be the most trusted digital asset exchange, and in order to do that, I think it's going to sound really boring, but I think there should be proper regulation in terms of how IEOs are done, and obviously there's no kind of governing body that does that at the moment. So I think what would be really interesting is that if the exchanges can form some form of alliance where we can kind of work together and kind of set, the basic principles and the basic foundations of how the IEO should be conducted. That in return will build more confidence with retail and also institutional investors, and obviously that will provide more penetration to the market and actually get this as actually have IEOs as something that is more mainstream. So I think that's kind of really important.
Okay, that's the time we have. Thank you, fellow panelists. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.